So I stand here today, and I'm being part of what I truly believe is the most powerful generation that our world has seen. All the resources we have as young people have given us enormous capacities to achieve things that previous generations could not, things that seemed impossible. We have security, we have great education, we have a great quality of life. Governments, institutions, and organizations have also recently acknowledged how important the role of young people, is in the past years. A prime example is the appointment by the Secretary General of the United Nations, a special envoy on youth. But the challenge is, how do we use those resources that we have to bring transformation in our communities, our schools, and perhaps to the world? Today I want to talk about one element that I find really important when I'm at a crossroad and I have to make a decision. And that element is an element I call going one step beyond. Going one step beyond gives you the ability to transform yourself, but also the environment that you're in. I truly believe, and I have generated myself, the idea that when young people are both empowered and are generating themselves, we can make decision makers, policy makers, institutions, and organizations not to work for the youth, but to work with the youth. Now, I come from an island called Cyprus, and it's a crossroad between Asia, Europe, and Africa. In 1974, a war broke out on the island of Cyprus. And ever since, the two communities, namely the Turkish Cypriot community and the Greek Cypriot community, have been separated. And perhaps growing on this island created the first challenge that I had as a young person. And that challenge was, how do I perceive other fellow young citizens from the other side? At the age of 16 years old, for the first time I was given the opportunity to interact, meet, and share ideas with those people from the other side. These people from the other side was the narrative that I was taught during my school time. A very negative narrative, the people from the other side. I had to overcome the prejudice that I had that was developed inside me. And the first introduction for myself to the concept of going one step beyond was when I was sitting in a room just like this with many other young people and young people from the other side. There was a quote on the wall, but what was interesting about that quote was the author's name and her age. The quote read, as you can see, "You will not get what you hope for, but you only get what you're willing to take." And Newton was a girl, a 15-year-old girl from the other side. And there I was, sitting in such a room, going one step beyond. But going one step beyond means much more than what I just described. Going one step beyond means that we have to participate, that we give the permission to ourselves to create something ourselves and not just search for things. And both do succeed and fail. It gives you the ability to be mindful of your experience and identify as a unique individual where your limiting beliefs are. Notice where they are, stop, pause, and then move ahead from those limiting beliefs. This unveiled the human potential of my birthright as a young person. The potential of how me as a young person can transform my community. It was the beginning of a journey that gave me the opportunity to participate in many activities, including bringing young people from both communities together, human rights education, peace education, non-formal education. And whenever I reached a crossroad where I had to make a decision, another question started popping up in my mind. And that question was, what do I really stand for? And from that I learned that when you reach a crossroad and you have to make a decision as a young person, it's really important to turn obstacles into mere circumstances. To identify those sparks that exist in our everyday life and use them to achieve something greater, something that can motivate and inspire us, but also something that you can use to inspire other fellow young citizens. The richness of those experiences, as you will see, and once you start developing those experiences, whether they're personal, moral growth, intellectual growth, will also help you make those decisions when you reach those crossroads. The last point about going one step beyond is about appreciating and embracing the act that you're carrying out. If you get to appreciate those elements will help you take action. And while it's quite beautiful to always go one step beyond, sometimes you will fail. But let's not forget that we fail. We're not failures. And there I was, very recently asking myself, how can I go one step beyond and achieve something greater? What can I do to contribute to a challenge that right now our world is facing? Just 2 weeks ago, I was standing in Lesbos, a Greek island, where over 500,000 refugees have transited. And the most mild description I could give of my feelings was that I felt sad about humanity. While the majority of us embrace the narrative that, yes, we're perhaps the greatest generation that the world has ever seen, over 65 million people are at this moment on the move. Others trying to avoid persecution, others trying to avoid war, poverty, and hunger. This disappointment, but also the curiosity on how can I contribute in transforming, maybe not the world, but my local community or my inner self, took me to a crossroad, whether I should go to Lesbos or not. It was a crossroad between being comfortable and uncomfortable. But I took the decision to go, and my decision was based on many factors, including the Ubuntu, which is an African saying, I am who I am because of who we all are. In other words, the belief in a universal bond of sharing that connects humanity. But also about the collective responsibility that I think our generation carries more than any other generation in trying to solve the challenges that we're currently facing. So I was in Lesbos the first day, in a town called Mytilene. While I was there, I would see refugees queuing up in the ATMs in order to get their monthly allowance. Out of curiosity, I was asking them, what would you do with the money? What will you do? They didn't need the money to buy anything luxury, a smartphone or proper food or anything. They only wanted the money in order to call back home friends, family, and tell them that they were alive, that they made the journey to Greece, and that they were waiting to be relocated somewhere else. Me and my fellow volunteers would carry out aid work during the day in the Karatepe camp in Lesbos, one of the two main hotspots. And during the night, we would patrol the coastline in order to see if any boat would land and make sure that all the people on board were safe. Considering that the shoreline between Turkey and Greece is from 6 to 12 kilometers, one could imagine that it's a very easy journey to cross a 6-kilometer distance. But the truth is, that's not the case for all. Thousands of refugees have died within those 6 kilometers. And as the days progressed, my thoughts became deeper into what else can we do as civil society, as individuals, as young people, to not only deal with the refugee crisis, but the crisis that we're facing in Europe, whether it's economic crisis or a crisis of values. But what struck me most was that when I was working in the camp, those refugees, whether I helped them or not, would walk up to me and say, "Hello, thank you." They would smile. They would invite me to eat lunch with them, even if it was a pot of rice sitting in the middle of their home. They would smile. They would wake up and live. I felt so small in front of them at certain moments. I felt ashamed that us as society could not give them the opportunity that we have. And this narrative that surrounds the refugees, there are some poor people with a different faith, a different way of living. Those refugees crushed it right in front of me. They crushed this narrative. This narrative that we see on the TV, that they have nothing to give us. They came to Europe to exploit the beauty and the benefits of Europe. I disagree with the people that say that refugees are coming to pursue their European dream. No. The refugees are coming to Europe to pursue a dignified life. I would never forget those short encounters with families, especially from Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Congo, where all had a traumatic story to share. But among them, there were doctors, skillful labor, nurses, teachers. And again, it just confirmed day by day that those people are the counter-narrative. It's just about us getting their story out. And what I bring today here from Lesbos to you and would like to share is that when we reach certain crossroads in life, it's important to take some things into account. The first one is what I mentioned before. We have a collective responsibility as young people to deal with many issues. By collective, I mean that we have to work with each other. Not divided, but united. The second is that we have to speak about those issues in our communities, in our schools. Not just because certain media outlets have put aside the refugee crisis or the financial crisis, this doesn't exist. No, we need to raise awareness. We need to speak up about it. We need to give hope to those people. Hope is an important word for our generation. We need to treat them as assets, embrace them as fellow human beings and not as strangers. We have to really understand that this generation of refugees will be the ones that we will have to help overcome the trauma in the future. And lastly, we need to redefine our values. What do we stand for as a newer generation? How can we avoid the failures of the previous generation? But what I also took was the parallel that we can draw to many of the challenges we face. So how can a solution to the refugee problem, for example, serve an example to us on how we can solve many other issues? How to create counter-narratives, how to avoid certain narratives that are negative or have a negative impact. But I would like to close with a very, very personal story in the camp. That during my 10 days from day one, I met a young boy called Birhad. Birhad was 3 years old. His family lived in the refugee camp for 11 months. He had another sister that was born on the camp 5 days after his family arrived. His family belongs to the Yazidi tribe. They live in Iraq. And of course, they fled to Greece. They were waiting to be relocated somewhere else in Europe. After still 11 months, they had the ability to smile and engage. Whenever I would go there, I would have Birhad on my side whenever I was doing aid work, whether I was carrying something, translating, or helping in any way. But when the last day came that I had to leave, and I went to Birhad to say goodbye, he turned around, walked away in disbelief, and pretended to be crying. And every now and then, he would turn back, give a glance at me to see if I was reacting. But when Birhad really realized that I was going to be gone for good, he started throwing stones at me. And he said to me, "You're going to go, and I'm going to stay here?" And that's a 3-year-old kid. And for me, Birhad is not a 3-year-old refugee. Birhad is a symbol, and should be a symbol to all of us. That Birhad is every other single human being that we're surrounded by. And the question is, how do we go one step beyond? And today here, from this stage, I want to go the extra step beyond as well. And I would like to tell you all that my goal in the next 24 months will be to swim around the island of Cyprus in a swim for peace effort. 648 kilometers of the coastline in 40 days. I want to swim it. Because it's the next step beyond for me to prove to the politicians and to my fellow citizens that when we overcome ourselves, when we go that extra step beyond, when we reach a crossroad and we go that extra step beyond, we can achieve so much. So today I'll leave you with this message. I urge you to go your step beyond, whenever and whenever that is. To mind the gap, listen to the person next to you as your life is depending on what he's saying. And please stand for something. Thank you very much.